right, we're going to get started. My name is Ryan Korstange. I'm a Director of Academic Affairs at the Tennessee Higher Education Commission. And first, let me just say thanks for taking your time to be here. I know it's a busy week, and actually that some of y'all are on spring break this week, and I appreciate you showing up and learning more about this OER course or OER used in this course. So OER Week, as you know, is an annual celebration. It's organized by OE Global, and it provides an opportunity for sharing and learning about achievements in open education across the world. There are 10 events that THEC is facilitating this week that highlight open education and open educational resources that are used and developed in Tennessee. And so our full schedule, I'm going to drop a link in the chat with our full schedule and a link to OE Global's full schedule. And there's some other things in the chat as well. And I'll just walk you through those in a second. But please take advantage of all of these events. Recordings of our Tennessee OE Week events will be made available next week, and I'll send those out to you as soon as I get them up on the website. Two ways of sort of staying connected with what's happening with textbook affordability and with open education in Tennessee. One is our textbook affordability listserv. You can join the listserv by emailing academic.programs@tn.gov, and we'll get you set up with the listserv. The listserv is just periodic reminders and updates about things that are happening with textbook affordability and open education across the state. You can also set up an account for the Tennessee Open Education Hub. That's an OER Commons hub. There's a link in the chat to a guide for how to set up an account and start joining joining groups on the hub. The group that you need to join to keep track of open education information in Tennessee is called Tennessee Open Education Information. Right, super creative name. Anyway, we're really excited about these events. We understand at THEC that high-cost instructional materials pose an increasing barrier to students, that they threaten access, that they threaten completion, and that they threaten our major goals of making sure that we have an educated workforce in Tennessee. And so we are really thrilled to be featuring a lot of efforts, a lot of innovative efforts towards making courses more affordable, more student-centered, and just really good instructionally. So we're excited today to learn about the OER work that's been happening around COM 2200 at MTSU. And so with that, I'm going to turn things over to one more thing. Sorry, I forgot. As you have questions, as this presentation goes, please just write the questions in the chat. We will have several minutes for questions at the end. I'll be monitoring the chat with my colleague Julie at THEC, and we'll make sure that your questions sort of get to the presenters, and we'll get all the questions answered. So with that, let me turn things over to the presenters, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Ryan. Good morning, y'all. I am Katie Gruber, and I'm joined by my colleagues Natalie Hoskins, Natanya Listash, and L'Oreal Stevens. We are faculty in the Communication Studies Department at MTSU, and as Ryan said, we teach COM 2200, the General Education Fundamentals of Communication course. And so today we wanted to discuss our use of OER, a pilot study in the basic public speaking course. And to start, let's see if my PowerPoint works here. So there's a grant that went out, as many of y'all know, the TBR OER grant in the spring of 2021 rather. And we were really excited to apply for that. And when we were awarded the grant, we piloted OER use in 11 sections of COM 2200. And so we want to walk you through our experience using it. And so we'll talk about the adoption of OER for this pilot study in fall 2021, the survey that we created to assess our efforts, some student and faculty reactions that were both positive and negative, and some suggestions in our future use. So I feel like when we talk about the adoption of OER materials, I should give you a little bit of background about how I kind of came to this. And it was a little bit by accident, actually. I was looking for stuff for my public speaking class, and I'm always trying to find new things, keep up to date, right? And I stumbled upon Lumen Learning and I loved it, thought it was amazing. And then I found more workshops at MTSU that were talking about OER. And then the call for the grant came out. And so I got really excited about exploring the use of OER and got Natanya, L'Oreal, and Natalie to join me. And so when we were awarded this grant, we started to collect and curate openly licensed content. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about how we implemented it and also how it was a time-consuming team effort. So a little bit about the sources that we used. Like I mentioned earlier, we did use Lumen Learning, and as you see from the screenshot of their front page, it's a lot of links, and this is a really thorough text. Another one that we used was the University of Minnesota's open textbook called Stand Up, Speak Out, and the other was a press book called Speak Out, Call In. I should say we also used NCA.com, NCA.org, the National Communication Association. And this was a lot of material and, a lot to sift through. Now, I should preface also that we assessed our efforts to use OER because we received some pushback from faculty in our department. And so from our use of this, we wanted to, better understand how it would be used and the benefits. And we knew it would be a worthwhile endeavor to evaluate our efforts using OER. So a little bit about those sources. As you can see, you may or may not be familiar with them, but there's a lot of public speaking OER out there already. And so we, as a team, the three of us, Natanya, L'Oreal, and myself, we worked collaboratively with a shared course shell in our LMS, which is Desire to Learn, or as we call it, D2L. And we pulled together lots of sources and had this shared master shell. So I like to tell my students, hey, what if I asked you to buy 3 textbooks? That would be ludicrous, right? I mean, that would be crazy and you'd probably drop my class. But that is the beauty of OER, is that you get to pull from all these different sources and you get to use quality material that you think best fits your class. And so as we were pulling all of these materials, we put them into some pre-established modules on D2L. And this is just a portion of what our master shell looked like. We had 10 modules, like I said, that we predetermined. So something like an introduction to public speaking would be the first one. The second module is ethics and listening, and so on. And so we plugged in all of these different sources through Lumen Learning, through the University of Minnesota, the press book, and found out that we had quite a bit of information. So we, the three of us, divided that work and started reviewing what we thought was the best and the most quality material, narrowed that down, and finally came to, what you see here in each module. But that meant that we also had a lot of additional resources. And so we didn't want to just throw that away, right? We wanted to make sure we kept up with that. So we created a hidden section within our shell so that if we wanted to come back to it, we could, just to have it there as a resource. And then finally, once we created that master shell and had narrowed it down and worked together on that, we shared that to our individual courses. So each of us had our own, courses. And so you may see from this, creating all of this material, already established OER, but collecting it all in this LMS, sifting through it, dividing it. It is a time-consuming effort, but thankfully we had this amazing team working together and we were able to share the load, as it were. So we were able to share that and work together, and that was honestly just a huge part of why I enjoyed it so much. But while we were creating this shell on D2L and putting together our OER materials, Natalie was working on assessments and IRB submissions. So I will turn it over to her to discuss assessment.
Thanks, Katie. So as Katie said, the reason why we chose to assess our OER implementation is because we did get some pushback from faculty in our department. Something that she didn't mention is that COM 2200 in the Communication Studies Department at MTSU has worked with a standardized textbook, Stephen Lucas, The Art of Public Speaking, for almost a decade now. And it was decided, a departmental vote many years ago, to standardize the textbook so that every section of the course would use the same textbook. We serve about 1,200 students a semester, so it's a pretty big deal. The pushback had a lot to do with resistance for change. And Natanya and Lori will talk about that in a few minutes, but we really wanted to make sure that as we were implementing OER, that we had the opportunity to make a clear case for the benefits of OER, if they emerged, to show our department that it was the costs of changing were lower than the risk of staying with the status quo, and that the costs for faculty would be lower than the benefits for students. And of course, OER is all about increasing equity and improving student access and retention and success and graduation. And so our goal here was to present to our department our findings so that we could make a strong persuasive case to have them consider OER or options of supplementing with OER to reduce the cost to students and increase their involvement or access and engagement with reading materials. So I designed a pre and post-test survey study to assess the benefits. And so we were interested in student attitudes, their experiences and perceptions. And we had the fortune, right? We have so many sections teaching public speaking every semester. We had the great fortune of having other faculty members who were willing to support us. In fact, there were 11 of our OER sections taught by Katie, Natanya, and L'Oreal, but we had 16 sections taught by, I believe it was 5 other instructors, or yeah, I think it was 5, who were using the standard Lucas text. So we were able not only to sample from the students in the OER sections, but we were also able to sample from students who were required to purchase or rent the text that was standardized across sections. And as Katie said, we did get IRB approval for the procedures used in this study, even though it's not required when you're doing a programmatic evaluation. We think that it's important not just for our department to review our textbook usage, but for other people who are engaged in teaching public speaking, as it is often not just a basic course for majors, but also a general education course across campus, which is the case here at MTSU. We serve every student in every major. So as you can see here, I have a little bit of the numbers. I do want to say that I'm not sharing all of the demographic information for the sake of time. So if anybody's interested in how the demographic groups are divided up in our sampling, because this was convenient sampling and we weren't able to get a fully representative random sample, I'm more than happy to share that in the question and answer or later if you want to email us and get some more information. But we did have 300 students participate in the study who were enrolled in OER sections, and then 140 students who were enrolled in the other textbook sections. As I said, this was a convenience sample, and our first attempt to get students to participate was not so great. So we had to make an amendment to the IRB protocol and ask if instructors would be willing to offer extra credit. So students were offered a maximum of 1% of the total course grade extra credit to participate. And wouldn't you know, that just shot up participation exponentially. So we were very grateful for that. Our first wave, or the pre-test of the survey, was administered in August, right after the first week of classes, and 281 students participated in the pre-test. And then again in November 2021, our post-test was administered. We had, of course, fewer participants because this was the week before finals. And as you know, it's very difficult to get students to participate even when they're being offered extra credit. So we posed 3 research questions in addition to 3 hypotheses, and I'm going to address them separately. And again, if you want more information about the specific measures, the questions, and the items that we included in the survey, I'm more than happy to share, but for time's sake, I'm really boiling it down to the key information. So first, let me talk about the research questions. We really wanted to examine students' feelings, right? So we know that textbook costs are a burden, right? We can assume there's like a financial constraint, but like, how do they feel about it was really important to us. Are we doing a disservice to the students and making them unhappy, or are they happy with textbooks? And then we wanted to know about those constraints more specifically. Are there other types? So research question number 1 was about how students feel about being required to purchase and rent textbooks. And we were also inquiring about the difference between gen ed classes, such as COM 2200, and their major courses. So we did ask questions in the survey about how they, if they saw a difference, and what that difference was between being required to purchase and rent textbooks for gen ed and being required to purchase and rent textbooks for major courses. Then the second research question addressed those constraints. What are the constraints? We're expecting to see financial constraints, but curious if there were others. And then research question number 3 was that we were interested in how students perceive the benefits, right? So faculty members and other staff on campuses everywhere, we assume, right, we have libraries and bookstores and we have course adoptions because we assume that reading materials are going to benefit students. We think, oh, if you read this assigned reading that I gave to the class, then you're going to A, get some information that's going to supplement my lecture or lessons, and B, you're going to have the ability to complete your assignments and perform better on course assessments, right? We think there's a benefit, but what is the perception of students in terms of benefiting from their reading materials? So that was our third research question. And the results that we got from our survey, both pre and post test, were that in regards to research question 1 about their feelings, students rarely had positive feelings about purchasing or renting textbooks, which is no surprise, right? We expected that. But we really wanted to be able to show with their own voices and their lived experiences that that this is a uncomfortable and unhappy time for them when they have to spend money or worry about spending money on textbooks. So you can see here, rarely they mention anything about loving their books or being happy about their books. There were a few outliers. There were that the students that said that they preferred hard copies over online resources. They exist, but they are in the minority. The majority of students responded to our survey saying that they felt anxious, stressed, nervous, or overwhelmed. In fact, one student said, quote, "I am hit with a wave of dread after I've found all my assigned textbooks and placed them in an online shopping cart," end quote. And another student said, quote, "I'm overwhelmed because I may not have the funds for it right now." And so you can see the constraints, the financial constraints are being mentioned there, but it's not just, oh no, I don't have money, I guess I'll not get a textbook, but it's, I'm required to get this textbook, so I know I have to stretch my wallet and it makes me very uncomfortable. And so these are the kinds of feelings we don't want students to have at the beginning of a semester when they're already stressed about managing other life responsibilities and their courses, and we don't want to have to add to that type of stress. So in response to research question number 2, what constraints do students face? Certainly there were constraints, like the biggest constraint was financial, which I focused on here, but I did want to share that other constraints were listed as not having the time, seller difficulties like booksellers, or shipment delays. And so there were certainly other constraints that were involved, but we saw prevalent in the data that financial constraints were the number one problem. So not only did they find that it was too costly, but they thought that it was a waste of money. And this actually kind of elaborates on the questions that we asked regarding gen ed and major courses, which I'll talk about a little bit more in the next slide. But the students overwhelmingly suggested that if it's a gen ed course, they shouldn't have to be paying for it. It should be provided by the university in some way. So they made suggestions about how it should be provided by the professor or the instructor, or that should be included in tuition, or they should have course texts that they distribute every semester and then collect at the end of the semester. So it's just like kind of a recycling program. One student said, quote, "Seems like the start of every semester is just a further drain on money that I'm already spending to attend classes." And another student said, "It's an additional financial burden that makes the first few weeks of class more stressful because I have to be more strict with money," end quote. And so again, there were several different types of constraints not having to do with finances, but that was the most predominant constraint that we found. And the third research question, how do students perceive the benefits? Well, they didn't. Most of them found, I mean, there were, again, outliers who saw that reading the course material helped them to learn lessons. And in COM 2200 with public speaking, I think that we're all very grateful when students say they're learning from the readings that we assign. Or that public speaking, you know, in and of itself is a valuable pursuit, because we did read some disparaging comments about our course, and that's not fun to do. So Katie and I sifted through these responses, and it was a little disheartening at times. But they did make a differentiation between gen ed courses and major courses. Students overwhelmingly thought that major course textbooks were valuable. They saw them as important to the course, important to their major, so they saw them as references they could use from one course to the next, and they saw them as materials that they would keep after graduation because it would help them in their careers. And so we would really be interested in finding out which careers those are that they would be holding on to those textbooks for years to come and referring to them, which we think is wonderful. So in courses like ours, the gen ed text, students tended to see them as not useful. And so there was a real issue with, and those of you who are in the library attending today, or in the bookstore attending today, I'm sure you can appreciate this. Many students complained that they weren't useful because they weren't used. So the professor required them to purchase or rent the textbook and then never used them. So students tended to see gen ed texts as not being useful in the semester, right? Because gen ed is forced, it's not their choice, and therefore they shouldn't have to use the book at all. But then they also found them to be not useful beyond the semester, that they would never use them again, so it was a waste of money. Okay, so of, I think, a greater interest were the hypotheses that we proposed here. We were interested in not only measuring their perceptions and beliefs and attitudes, but we were also interested in comparing those two groups, as we mentioned before. So this is where we're taking those OER sections, of which there were 11, and the 16 textbook sections, and comparing students on 3 hypotheses. So we predicted, because OER materials are available on the first day of classes, because students can readily access them, because they are, you know, in some ways easier to read and have a little bit more of an interactive component than flipping pages in your hard copy textbook. We expected that students in the OER sections would complete assigned readings more often, would read course materials more closely, and would perceive a greater connection between the reading and their performance on course assignments, which translates to benefit, right? We expected that the OER students, when compared to the textbook students, would engage with these materials and benefit, or perceive the benefit, we should say, more so than the textbook students. And so included here is a little table on the next slide. And because those hypotheses are pretty long, I reiterated the idea here with the questions we ask them. So just keep in mind, that's not the hypothesis, that's the question we asked in the survey. But the table shows our means, standard deviations, the test coefficients, and significance levels for the independent samples test, t-test that we used to test these hypotheses. And you know, we decided our oh my gosh, our alpha level would be set at 0.05, which is pretty common to assume a confidence level of 0.95 or 95% confidence. And so all of our hypothesis tests or t-tests were found to be significant. So it's important that we acknowledge that in each case, if you look at the mean scores, the students who had enrolled in courses with OER did read more often, read more closely, and perceived a greater benefit from their readings than the students who were enrolled in courses that required them to purchase or rent the textbook. So, you know, these are really encouraging results that show us that having OER in place of the textbook, especially in a general education course where you are serving 1,000 or more students per semester, makes a huge impact on students and their engagement in the course.
So overall faculty and student reactions, thankfully we had a lot of positives here. And the first positive that we want to note is the money aspect. Students don't like spending money, just like we don't like spending money sometimes. Students said I was joyous when I read that we didn't need to buy any books for this class. I like to save all the money I can. So we were trying to help them out, and we were able to help them out with this OER content. They also tended to like the materials, which was interesting. They were saying it wasn't too long, it was easy to apply to their own situations. This quote says, "I personally think that the online materials we're using are perfect for the subject at hand," which is really encouraging. It was just convenient for them. It was available immediately. There was no need to order it, no need to wait for it. So they could start day one ready to go with the class and work on the class materials. We as faculty also had some positives that we noted. We had happy students. That's always great. Students really enjoyed having that free OER, which helped them to utilize those materials in the class. We see students are getting more out of the material. We can see them using the terms that were actually discussed in the text in their own discussion boards. We could see them utilizing them in their own speeches, the way that we hoped that they would do when we were using the textbook. They just seem to be using it more. We also noted that it was a great way for us as faculty members to refresh our own course. So especially for some of us who've been teaching this for a long time, it can get a little stale. Utilizing those OER materials helped us to refresh our brains, get a new look on the material, and we were able to pass that information on to our students. So overall, we had a lot of good positives, but of course, with every positive, we got to have some negatives too.
Yay, I get to do the negatives. Okay. So, as mentioned before, a few students did state a preference for hard copy textbooks. That did, come out in the surveys. Also, there were a few people who experienced some tech issues with the links that we had provided, and so Natanya and Katie and I would work together to fix any issues with those links. That happens every semester in any course. And also, there were a few students who expressed that they didn't like to click on so many different links within the course. And so Katie will address that in a few minutes. Also, as mentioned, we had, some faculty issues or some concerns that we were implementing OER and giving it a shot last semester. And from what I've learned with corresponding with these faculty, I found a few reasons that they had concerns. And one was if students had a choice between OER sections and non-OER sections where they had to pay for a textbook, that they would choose not to, have to purchase a textbook, and they would choose an OER section. And that might mess up our enrollment for COM 2200 somehow. And then another concern was that using OER would break our ties with McGraw-Hill, because as stated, we've used the same textbook or the newer edition for actually more than a decade. And in fact, the whole time that I've been at MTSU, which was beginning in 2010. So we've always had that connection. And some expressed that we would lose that connection and that we would lose some funding that McGraw-Hill provides for our annual speech contest within the department, and that usually once a year, McGraw-Hill will provide some type of breakfast or lunch when we have a faculty meeting, and they didn't want to lose that tie. Also, MTSU is currently undergoing a general education redesign, and so some faculty thought that the timing was bad to make any changes that seemed to be major, like implementing OER, and that maybe the timing was just off to do that. But really, the bottom line with the faculty concerns is that Katie and Natanya and Natalie and I did not come up with the idea to offer this. The provost's office offered these grants specifically to implement OER and really encourage faculty participation. So that is why we did it, to begin with. And really, I know that I joined this effort to save students money. That was exactly why I wanted to take part in this. And I think that my colleagues feel the same way. Thank you.
So now I'd like to talk about some suggestions we might have for anyone that's interested in using OER and our own future use. So I will say first that, as Lori stated, because of the backlash we faced, if you are interested in using OER and you have a department like ours that has this kind of standardized text, you may face the same kind of resistance. So just prepare yourself for that. But also because of some of the complaints that we receive from our students about the abundance of links, some of which, even if we didn't have problems with them, there were just too many. And they were not always clear about exactly what they had to read, because since we were pulling from many different sources, there would be the arrow to go to the next article within that book or that source, but maybe we weren't utilizing that source. And so there was a little bit of confusion about that. And like Lori mentioned, that was some of the negative feedback that we received. So in spring of 2022, right now, we were granted a mini grant for use of OER. And so we have been putting together a press book. So we have adapted what has already been used, what we have already used. And we have put in some original work, as I have shown here. These are screenshots from the press book, and we're really excited about it. We have put this together, we've reviewed it, and we're sort of in the editing process right now, but we're really excited, and we get to present it to the faculty in our department in April. And this will help us determine sort of next steps in our future use. But we're, like I said, we're pretty excited. We love being able to use OER and help our students out, especially for the kind of course that they keep saying students, it's forced upon them. So, oh gosh, sorry about that. That was supposed to be the last slide. So I wanted to show y'all our contact information. If you wanted more information from us, we would be happy to speak with you, email you, chat with you. So we thank you for your time. Thanks, y'all.
Okay, we have several minutes for some questions, so please feel free to drop questions in the chat as you have them. There's one already, and it says, was there any general age group who preferred a hard copy book over an electronic book?
So Nellie, that's a really great question, but like I said, there were only a couple of students that gave that response. So we weren't, I mean, I could go back into the data and check their ages, but there's no way to, make a statistical calculation of an age group. So to compare a group, we would need more data. Yeah, so there were two people who said, I prefer a hard copy.
Mhm. Yeah, I can tell you, Nellie, anecdotally, those two were my students. And one of them, she just flat out said, I prefer hard copies. And she was a true freshman, so 18, 19 years old. And the other said that she preferred hard copies. And I told her, if you want to print it out, you're more than happy to, or you're more than welcome to. And so she actually printed it out. She told me in class. And so she used it that way and liked it. But that's just my own, anecdotal kind of experience.
The next question from Sharon. Hi, Sharon. I wonder, Natanya, Lori, Katie, I wonder at any point in time, did you tell your students how much they were saving?
I did not. All of my classes, though, were online only. They were asynchronous courses, so I never was in face-to-face contact with any of them, but I didn't mention it in any of the materials that I had.
I taught a hybrid section and two online sections or one online section, and I don't remember telling them how much they were saving. But we did discuss it on ground that they, would not have to purchase anything, and they were very, happy and complimentary about that. But we didn't discuss a price.
Mhm.
think-
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I know that I told them, hey, this is free. And I, explained all the resources that you would need for class. And I would tell them, I want to save you as much money as possible, but I never set a specific number. They could, no, I will say, I don't know if Natanya and L'Oreal had this experience. I did have a couple students that when they registered, and this kind of goes to Kristen's question, a couple of them registered for my class and bought the book because that's what was listed. And when you go to, when you apply to your class, it shows that book information. And so they came to class on the first day with their book. And I'm like, well, you can return it and get your money back. So they may have known up front that it cost them, $50, $100, because that's typically what we have seen.
I think that a brand new copy though is $125.
Mhm.
Is that right? No,
Right
Lori?
now on the website, it's showing that the Art of Public Speaking 13th edition is $70 from McGraw-Hill.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. But more to that question about knowing at registration, MTSU has been working vigilantly to make this system like work together. So our bookstore now has the capacity to mark sections as using OER for that very purpose. But when we started, we didn't have the ability to designate the course sections with OER materials. I think they might have been changed midway through the year so that we could have designated them in the spring, but our department only gave us the support to do a pilot in the fall. And so we were not technically allowed to use OER for the spring semester. So we had to opt out of being able to designate those classes. But there is a banner and a bookstore designation. Thanks, Suzanne. That's where I got the number from. The MTSU bookstore has it at 125. Ooh, so Jason, I'm going to try to answer your question, but I don't think that I know the answer to this. So the question is how OER authorship is acknowledged and valued in the promotion and tenure faculty evaluation. Um, if we were to take the press book and the D2L course shell alone as something that our team, and really it was Katie, Natanya, and Lori that put the resources together. I was assessment person. But if we took those efforts, that labor by itself into consideration, I don't know that it would weigh very heavily in evaluation for tenure and promotion. However, these efforts this year are associated with the OER grant. And I do think that our department and our college and the university values external funding. I don't think it, I know it, right? So the fact that the labor was associated with an external grant, I think is something that is seen as valuable. So, the intricacies of the rest of your question, I'm not sure I know about, but that's a great question.
So Trish is asking if we looked at drop rates between students. I know we kind of casually mentioned it, but I don't think we really did any statistical analysis of it, right?
Right.
Originally in my class, it seemed like I said, mine were the asynchronous people, and they seemed to stick in the class a little bit longer. At the end, it ended up averaging out, though. It was pretty much the same ones that were going to drop originally when I had the textbook, did the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Katie and I were looking at the drop rates the other day for another grant, and it didn't occur to me to look at that. So thank you, Trish. I'm gonna we'll actually consider that as a useful comparison now that we have the data from last semester. So I appreciate that.
I would like to note, because it's a public speaking course, I don't have any basis of knowledge of how often other classes are dropped, but ours are dropped fairly regularly because of students' fear of public speaking. And so we have to try really hard in those first few weeks to establish that environment of comfort and environment of positivity and acceptance. And I would say, just from my own experience, it's a little bit different than other classes where there's not that component of presentation and you being the center of attention, because students are just not used to that. Unfortunately.
Thanks, Katie. So Nellie's question, I would encourage you, Nellie, to join us again tomorrow at 1 o'clock because I'll be back with the James E. Walker Library group giving a presentation about our work here in the bigger picture. Yeah, please come back because the cost for press books is not something that is known for our team, but I know that Suzanne and others we'll have the Vice Provost of Faculty Affairs at our presentation tomorrow at 1 o'clock. I'm pretty sure one of them will be able to answer that question, how much it costs for the library for MTSU to purchase, I guess it's a license or I don't know. See, I don't even know what to call it, a membership or whatever. And are you asking like how to find the book, the press book that we've made for our course? Or are you asking how to find press books for any course book creation? Not sure if we're going to get that, but
You want us to unmute Nellie?
I wondered if they would type their question again.
We'll do that.
Yeah. And then Katie, if how was it for you to use press books to create your book? Okay. So Katie, do you want to speak about that?
Sure. So I will say it was really easy. I am a user of D2L. I try to use as much as I can, all the bells and whistles of D2L, but ultimately Pressbooks is fairly intuitive. There are a couple issues it has, of course, because nothing is perfect, but it was, and Natalie can tell you, and the rest of the team, because they're reviewing it, but I literally just took what we had in already established OER that we were using and plugged it in and gave, those the rights and credit, right? But there's some original content that I created that's in there based on just experience as an instructor for several years. And the application is really simple, but what I like too is that it allows you to incorporate H5P. So we're looking into creating more of that in there as well to help students. I'm impressed with what I have seen that's already there for public speaking texts. I haven't looked into many other areas, honestly. I was just mainly looking at public speaking for, inspiration, but it's really impressive and pretty easy to use. Yeah.
And
Ashley,
thanks,
oops,
Ryan
go
has
ahead.
Ryan gave some additional information, and it's called an institutional subscription. So I feel like I've learned something here today. Go ahead.
So Ashlyn had a question. Hi, Ashlyn. Good to see you again. About students mentioning the OR text being easier to read or less intimidating versus a textbook. Because there were such smaller blurbs of information, they did tend to say it was a bit easier. We did have some confusion because some of the text that we used had buttons at the bottom that said next. And so some students tended to think that they had to keep scrolling through that information instead of just reading that one page. But overall, it did seem like they thought it was a little bit easier and not quite as intimidating.
And that was feedback that Natanya got in the classroom from students one-on-one or in group. No? Where'd that come from? Sorry, Natanya.
I think that was just all of us talking about it. I remember in one of our meetings, we were talking about it.
Got it. But those reflections come from your personal experiences with the students. And I was going to comment, I wasn't so far off. I was going to comment on how, Ashlyn, we didn't really think to measure that in the survey, right? We could have included a question that's in the post-test for the OER sections, what was your experience with the OER? It seems really kind of like a failure, but we could have asked that and we didn't. But we did have some students, like Katie, I think mentioned, or maybe it was Natanya and L'Oreal talking about the benefits or reactions, saying that the online materials were perfect. Like they just said, for this course, these materials are perfect. Now we can't like flesh that out and know what about it was perfect, but I suspect that ease of use and cost were big parts of why they felt that way.
Ryan, it looks like you asked about the student perception about being required to buy a book for Gen Ed. Am I reading that right? So when Natalie and I looked at the data, and Natalie, feel free to chime in too. I got the sense that they do not like buying books for Gen Ed. For one, like Natalie mentioned, it's a class that they feel is, quote, forced on them. Obviously, we know differently and it's a valuable class, but they don't often see it that way and they just want to get straight to their major courses. And like she said, there's this feeling that if it was provided, either in tuition or a class set, and I got the feeling a class set like you might have in high school, which of course, they're coming from high school, that's kind of what they're used to. So maybe that's where they got the idea. But I certainly got the sense that they want something to be included in some way, whether it's just provided outright or included in tuition. Natalie, follow up?
Yeah, I would agree with that and say that in the analysis, because we did a couple stages of coding and then got together and discussed our codes to try to refine them, we found a couple of patterns regarding autonomy. So student choice was a big issue when it came to general education, and they tend to see gen ed courses as being forced upon them, only needed for graduation, and not important to their major degree, which I think Katie and I spent a little bit of time kind of lamenting the fact that students still don't understand the benefit of a general education and a liberal arts degree where it's really making you a better person, not just better in your job, but like also better every aspect of your life. And we could talk about that for hours, I'm sure. But they see their major as the reason they came to college, and so they believe it's their choice to take those classes, and therefore they like see the value in spending money on those classes. Like one student said, major focus classes are different, as these classes are what the student is electing to take in order to fulfill their future career. Another student said, I'm significantly more okay with purchasing a textbook for my major because for the most part, I decided to take that class. But when I'm forced to take a gen ed class and then I'm required to buy a textbook for it, it's upsetting. And so they really did say there was another theme that was a pattern that money is better spent on the major. So again and again, they said things like, I feel cheated when I have to purchase a textbook for gen ed, or textbooks for gen ed classes tend to be a waste of money. So really strong, hurtful words. Yeah, so that was throughout, the students' responses.
Natalie, I don't know about dual enrollment. I mean, we offer it, but I don't know if we gave the survey to dual enrollment.
No, we didn't. We had a mix of on-ground and online sections, but none of ours were dual enrollment. And it was a requirement of our IRB protocol that all students or participants be students that were 18 and older. And so we did not sample from our dual enrollment classes. And MTSU does offer dual enrollment, and public speaking, or COM 2200, is one of those dual enrollment courses. Yes, and I'm sure it would have made a difference in the results because you're working with a different set of beliefs or expectations about cost there. Good question.
Okay, we have about 8 minutes left in the hour, but there's a pause in the questions. We certainly have time for more questions, and put those in the chat if you have them. Let me just say, as maybe final questions are coming in, if there are any, this has been just a fantastic conversation. Really appreciate your attention to detail with all of the assessment and stuff that you've done. It's been very illuminating, and just have really enjoyed it. Yeah, so if there are any more questions, please drop them into the chat. Otherwise, we really appreciate. Go ahead, Natalie.
Well, thanks. I was just gonna tag on since we're getting accolades in the chat, not questions. So thank you, everybody. But I did want to add, from my personal experience with this grant and implementing OER, I have, like, especially going through the students' responses and reading some of these remarks, I have really questioned some of my assumptions about pedagogy and use of materials in a way that I think is really valuable. So when I first spoke about the assessment, I remember I said, we think there's a benefit in reading materials, but students don't. like overwhelmingly, they just don't see the connection. And we questioned whether sometimes the students' responses were maybe just like misinformed or confused, because some students would say, I was required to buy the textbook, but then we never used it. And we thought, well, did you never use it, or are you just not aware of how it was used? And so I think it's really useful to take away from this, not just like the fact that we could be saving students money and stress and heartache if we implemented these materials in the class, but to have a more conscious and deliberate approach to talking to our students about student learning objectives and how the reading materials will help them achieve those objectives and how the reading materials connect to their assignments. Like, I found myself this semester being very careful when giving student assignment guidelines to say, this is how chapter 3 is going to work to support your efforts, because you're going to need to apply this theory, or you're going to need to like be in conversation with a textbook author or whatever. And so I just want to say that I'm grateful not only for having the opportunity to work with these wonderful people, but also to have the opportunity to kind of like question my assumptions and become a better teacher as a result. Thank you, Suzanne.
Yeah, that's awesome. I have a lot of thoughts that come from that, but I'm sure talk to you after this session because that's just really interesting.
Terrific.
But yeah, the connection between the materials we use and how we teach is just really important. But thank you all. This has been just really provocative and fantastic. So I really appreciate your time today. Thank you all for attending, and see no other questions. So I think we can be done. Thank you all.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Bye.